on the recording?
Yeah.
Looks like the camera is over there facing the TV screen.
That one? Yeah. Good call. Another minute or two for folks that are still coming in, joining us through Zoom. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, welcome back. I hope that you had a good and hopefully less chaotic weekend. Got less snow, but things have been freezing. So hopefully this is a pretty normal week. I know there's been questions surrounding the sort of rise and spread of the Omicron variant, its impact on classes. My understanding is that things are just going to continue, but that there might be some changes to policies. I'll let you know and keep you updated. But it's good to have you back. I'm seeing that there's a lot of folks returning. There might be a new face or two as well. So welcome. Glad to have you here. I also have, again, our recording and Zoom rooms that are open. So people might be joining us through Zoom. And right after class, I'll be uploading the recording of the class for you to review later. So I want to get started today with an individual prompt to help get you thinking about some of the ideas that we'll be going over surrounding group norms and group participation. What I want you to do is to think about a small group. So not a group in this class that you've worked with, but a small group that you are either currently a member of or have been a member of in the past. Again, this could be an extracurricular, sports, or maybe some type of extracurricular activity that you've been involved with in the past. And what I'd like you to do is you can either write or type this, but you will be turning this in as part of your attendance and participation for the day. To first of all, think about what this group is. And then after that, I just want you to take some time to write down some specifics about this group. In other words, how does this group communicate? Some of the ways that you might think about and start to write down the communication within your group could include the channels. For instance, does your group use email? Do they use Zoom? Do they use FaceTime? What are some of the specific pieces of language or jargon that your group uses? In other words, what is language that an outsider who's not a part of your group would not be familiar with? What are some of the roles that certain members of the group play? And then lastly, what are some of the do's and don'ts of your group? For instance, things that they should and should not do. And if you can think of any other examples of ways that your group communicates, you're welcome to write that down too. So again, write or type. If you type, you can always email that to me at the end of class or attendance, whichever is easiest for you. Write or type your name, the group that you've identified that you're a current or past member of, and then examples of some of the ways that your group communicates. So I'll give you some time to work on that. Give you a couple more minutes on this.
Where's the fence back?
So it's not on that side of the hall, but if you continue walking down, you'll take a left. Yeah, it was unfortunately on the other side of the hall. Yeah. Go ahead and finish up what you're currently writing and working on. I'm going to ask you to just hang on to this since we'll be returning to it later rather than hand it in right away. Now that we're in the second week of class, beginning this week, I am going to start to take regular attendance. And the way I like to take attendance, right, is by doing either individual prompts, group activities, or other things like this that ask you to think about and apply and use some of the things from class. So we'll be doing a little bit more with this in just a bit, but it's a way for us to start thinking about the groups that you're a part of, which will help you to brainstorm and plan for your first short written assignment to class. It will also help you as you're thinking about the process of small group communication, including some of the norms, behavior, and things to know about groups. So before we get into any of that stuff, I want to see if there's anybody that is here for the first time for today. Hasn't joined us through Zoom. Yes, welcome. Feel free to tell us your name, what home is for you, and something interesting or not interesting that happened to you during break.
My name is Chael Williams. Home to me is probably where I feel most comfortable. And something interesting that happened to me. Chicken got out of our coop and we had to go chase the chicken.
Oh, was that successful? Did you find the chicken?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. When we moved, our previous folks there had a chicken coop, and we were really hoping that they would leave it there, but they took it. So we didn't get chicken. That's fine. Welcome. We're glad to have you here, Dale. Again, we went over some things last week, but I'll be refreshing just some things that we talked about and ways to help kind of acclimate you to the class. Anybody else here for the first time? Awesome. So just for some quick housekeeping and updates related to the class, as a reminder, normally every Sunday, I do have your Canvas quiz, open note and open book that you'll be taking that covers reading from that week. But because we had a late start and didn't start until last Wednesday, the week one quiz has been extended, right? So some of you have already completed the first quiz, but if you haven't, that's due by this Wednesday at midnight. It goes over the syllabus, and it also goes over content from that first section of the group communication textbook that's available on campus. So if you're having trouble accessing any of the readings or anything related to that assignment, please let me know. Again, you have unlimited time to take it, but once you open that tab and take it, you'll need to finish it with that tab open. The readings and all of that are available on campus. And also remember, right, that you can access the recordings and slides right after class for classes that you missed. I also, including for today, post the slides for the day a little bit before the class starts. So you don't have to write everything down word for word, especially if you use a device like a laptop, you can follow along and download the slides for yourself if you'd like to. Just as an update for people that are here for the first time today, and just the general update related to the class. And if you go to Canvas, you can access a lot of the material related to the class. So Canvas, again, includes the video slides for last Wednesday and Friday's class. It also includes each week the reading that you'll do. For this week, we do have the extended day for the first quiz, but the second quiz is still going to be due on January 16th. So just know that that's coming along and to continue to work through that. Last week, we went over a lot of the basics of small group communication. And this week, we'll be developing that a little bit further to look at what it means to be a member of a group. What are the roles and actions that people in a group take, and so on. So I think this is a great way to explore some of the ideas that we've been talking about a little bit further. I will also, after class today, be posting more information for you regarding your first short writing assignment for the class that will ask you to reflect on your own participation within a group. So I'll be posting that after class, and we'll be able to talk more about that in class on Wednesday. So last class, again, we discussed perspectives on group work, right? What does it mean to be involved in a group, to participate, the roles and so on that we play? We went over some ideas within small group communication, right? Core ideas of what it is and how it applies to communication more broadly. And then we applied small group communication to our daily lives. Again, the groups that we're a part of, the ways that we have to participate in groups, right? Whether we like it or not, and the ways to do so effectively. One thing that I noticed as we were going around on the first day of class, and people were introducing themselves, right, is that if a group is going well, if you feel good about your membership and good about your communication, right, you have this really positive experience. It can be more than the sum of its parts. You really get together, you know, you brainstorm, you come up with great ideas, and it can be a really positive experience. But a lot of us have been burned before in groups. One of the biggest things folks mention not liking is the feeling that by being in a group, you're going to get social loafers, right? People that are lazy, that don't participate, that procrastinate on work. And there might have been situations, including those in the past, where that has negatively impacted you in your own performance. So in a lot of situations, right, you get this fear response to participating in a group because of concern about how others will or won't contribute. So, you know, a lot of those concerns are pretty well founded. And so a lot of what we'll be talking about are skills that help you reflect on your own participation in the group and ways that we can improve communication overall for people that might not be as engaged with us. Some of the ideas, right, that are kind of at the core of this, and why it's important, again, we have to be in groups whether we want to or not. Again, the bigger a group is, the more possibilities there are for interaction. As I mentioned last class, right, if you have 3 people, A can interact with B can interact with C can interact with A, but A and B can interact with C and B can interact with A, and so on. So there's these increasing permutations that develop as the group gets bigger and bigger. And a lot of this class is looking at all of these possibilities. We also talked about how participating in a group, right, typically involves these 4 stages. When you did the activity last week for your extra credit, right, it was about how you were oftentimes in this forming and storming stage. You were trying to hash out and figure out your differences among members of the group. My other class, it was interesting because there was a group who basically centered all of their questions on this or that, cats or dogs, morning or night, spring or summer. So there was an interesting way that they were trying to figure each other out. So you were doing these early stages last week as you were understanding and figuring out how your group members work together. You were also doing performing, right, where your group members were delivering and sharing what they had in common. And then the group adjourned or completed after that activity. We also discussed toward the end of last week, right, the idea that our group membership can change over time, right? It's this process of going in and then coming out of the group. Most of the time, we're not going to be in groups forever. They do change, and our membership within those changes. So oftentimes, you're a prospective student, you're just starting out, you're becoming closer, right? You're knowing the rules. You might start to get your foot out the door. For instance, if you're a graduating senior, if you're thinking about other things to do, if you're no longer interested in being involved in an activity, and then you might leave the group. So this kind of stage of forming and leaving was also a key idea from last week. So for this week, right, in addition to that review, I want us to understand the idea of group norms a little bit better and some of the ways that we can apply and use group norms for our own participation. So if you've ever seen, the Avengers movies, including Infinity War and Endgame, right, there's this scene where the Avengers are going to Wakanda, right, where T'Challa, that's what Panther is from. There's this whole meme about how I think it's Captain America tries to like bow, and he says in response, well, we don't do that here, right? And it's kind of a silly meme that's used in a lot of situations. If somebody has a faux pas or says something that's inappropriate or doesn't make sense to the context. And that's a way of thinking about group norms, right? They are the rules that we follow, essentially the script for participating in a group. They reflect the expectations about how the group members should participate and how they should interact with one another, right? So one way of thinking about this is you don't yell fire at crowded theater. That's a norm or rule that prevents people from freaking out, having a really negative experience, and everything that goes with it, right? So in a similar way, I ask you to start thinking about how members of your group behave. So for instance, one kind of common practice that we'll be talking about later on in the quarter are more formal structures of group organization. For instance, how many folks have ever heard of Robert's Rules of Order? Yeah, a few of you, right? I would imagine, especially with ASUU, right? That's a pretty common thing. It's a specific and formal way that group members communicate, right? So if you've ever seen a group where it says, you know, all those in favor, is there a second? Let's move on to the next agenda item, so on, right? There's this very formal way that people communicate in order to do things like pass legislation. If you're like a social and political nerd like me, and you've ever watched something like C-SPAN or like seen Congress, right? There's a very specific way that members of Congress pass a piece of legislation. They go through things like an amendment process, the voting process, so on, right? Again, those play into group norms. They regulate how members of a group can behave or participate. If, right, you or anybody you know is involved in military, right, you know that there is a lot of very specific norms, not speaking out of turn, following guidelines and rules for communication and conduct. So there's a lot of different ways group norms play into our behavior. There's a lot of reasons that having group norms is a good idea, right? If you're thinking about creating your own group or organization, one of the best things that you can do to make that group work well is to create a shared set of understanding among group members about what is and is not okay, right? For instance, if you are to talk about drafting and drafting school, right? Maybe you're somebody that's involved in architecture. So in that situation, when you're referring to drafting, there's a common set of understandings about what drafting is, right? It's not the military, it's not being receiving a draft card or anything like that, right? It's about being involved in architecture. So even though that word can mean multiple things, members of your group understand that it has that specific connotation. So group norms are important in that way. If our words don't have specificity, if they don't mean anything, then we can't communicate with each other at all. If I were to say I have a dog, but a dog could literally mean like a chair or a giraffe or anything else, if I told you I have a dog, you wouldn't understand or know what I was talking about. So group norms help to constrain and define our language. They help us communicate in that way, because understand how members should behave and act. One way that group norms happen, right, is having something like a group leader. So a lot of clubs and organizations might have something like, a class president or a team captain, right? Somebody that occupies a leadership role that helps the members of the group overall communicate with one another. Group norms also create boundaries, right? They help to understand what is in and what is outside of the group. So for instance, if you're a member of a group that generally is pretty top down, right? People in power are the ones that are in charge of defining and naming the rules, then you wouldn't speak out of turn, or you wouldn't talk in a way that's inappropriate to that situation. And again, because a lot of our communication can be pretty ambiguous, right? We're not entirely sure what we mean. Knowing that drafting means architecture, if you're in an architecture group or club, is an important way to resolve uncertainty among group members. You might think back, right, to the idea of uncertainty reduction theory. It's the idea that when we don't know others pretty well, we do things to try to understand them better and get more information, right? It's a survival instinct. If we as humans feel like we're in an unsafe or uncertain situation, we're going to try to figure out our surroundings. It's like the Hunger Games, right? You try to figure out what's available, who's where, how you're going to survive. The same way, we do what we can to try to understand one another. Another key idea here, right, is that the norms and behaviors among us as people in a group can be both explicit and implicit, right? So one way to think about this difference is whether or not the norms and rules among your group are written. If you're a member of something like a club or organization on campus, for instance, a sports team or an extracurricular, right, like a philosophy club, there's a good chance that your group has some type of handbook or code of conduct, right? That would be explicit norms that guide the behavior of the group as a whole. Oftentimes, you're going to sign off on those and indicate you consent to and agree to those guidelines. Whereas implicit norms are not written, but you can think back again to Black Panther, we don't do that here. They're things that are left unsaid, but that members of a group agree to. So to try to kind of divide this up, you can think about an explicit norm. For instance, you're joining a club or organization on campus, and by joining it, for instance, if you're traveling or something like track cross country, right? You receive the rules and guidelines for behavior. You're doing a meet, what you should and shouldn't do, and so on. And you sign off on those. That's an explicit norm that you're following individually. An implicit norm, right, is the idea, for instance, that you should raise your hand if you want to speak, that you've oftentimes heard in a lot of classes, right? One norm that tends to change from high school to college, right, is in oftentimes in K-12, you need to go to the bathroom, you raise your hand. But now, right, you're an adult, you're in college, you don't need to do that. You need to go to the bathroom, you can just do that. That's an implicit norm. An explicit norm, right, that applies to a whole group might be, for instance, that the group takes minutes. I cannot emphasize enough how helpful it is if your group meets formally to take minutes or to do a recording of that meeting. The biggest reason why is because there is going to often be a he said, she said situation where people say something did or did not happen in the group, and there's no way to trace that back, right? One model that tends to work really well, again, folks who are involved with things like ASUU might be familiar, right, is that you take minutes, you take notes on what happened during the meeting, and then in the next meeting, you review and you approve those minutes. It's a way of the group members sharing that they understand and agree to what happened and how that information was documented, right? So an explicit norm that applies to the whole group would be agreeing to take notes. The whole group implicit norm is the idea that, you know, every time somebody meets, they bring something like donuts or sweets to the group. So that might not be a thing that's written, that's hard-coded. It's just something that they do. So for instance, when I took a class, we had like an Excel spreadsheet where every week somebody was going to sign up to bring in this thing. That was kind of fun, but it was a way for us to come together and understand each other a little bit more, right? Oftentimes, these kinds of norms that a group creates are ones that develop over time as group members get to know each other better. So the last thing that I want to go over before we break off and continue where you started from for today is to understand some of the different types of norms and the roles they play. Again, all of this stuff matters because as a member of a group, right, and participant in a group, you're trying to acclimate and figure out how members of the group can work together to solve an issue. So the interaction norm, that is an idea that group members communicate with one another in a particular way. For instance, right, as students here at EOU in this class, due to state and university level policy, right, we need to wear masks. So that's how we communicate. That impacts our communication verbally and non-verbally, right? So that an interaction norm is how people communicate. Secondarily is an idea of a procedure-oriented approach, right? Under a procedure-oriented norm, it explains how the group functions. What is their procedure or practice? For instance, do they meet every week on Zoom? Do they use something like Google Calendar? Do they meet more informally? For instance, whenever they decide that it's a good idea to hold a meeting or a session. So this is about how the group member sort of structures itself and works. Status norm, so again, something like ASEOU or Associated Students of Eastern Oregon University, right, is going to be involved with a lot of student leadership and policies that impact the organization. We also do things such as vote, right, and elect folks that will be participating in a lot of these kinds of leadership positions. As a result, right, if you're the student body president or you're a student on campus that occupies a leadership role, you're going to have status. You're going to have some level of influence as a group member, right? If you're involved in an athletic activity on campus, and you're the team captain, and you're trying to figure out the schedule and where you're going to travel, you're going to have some level of influence over that decision that other members of the group do not have. So power matters. Not everybody goes into a group with the same level of power or influence. And so those differences shape a lot of the ways that members of that group communicate. And then lastly, our achievement norms. In other words, what is the group supposed to do? What are they supposed to create at the end of all of this? How much work or effort is expected of that group to complete by the end? So, for instance, right, if you're on a deadline and your group is supposed to produce a PowerPoint for a class, that might be the achievement norm, right? If you're grading or working through a whole big stack of papers in a group, you know, how much is it that your group is supposed to do? So that can be another norm too, is the amount of work that your group is supposed to do. Taken together, these help us to understand how groups develop over time and some of the ways that norms and beliefs among the group members can change and be impacted by things such as the group's goals. So what I'd like you to do now is to return to the prompt that I asked you to work on at the beginning of class. And I was asking you to write down a group that you're a part of and some of the ways that your group members communicate. What I want you to do is to find a partner or a group of three, whichever is easiest for you, And using some of the ways that your group communicates, I want you to start to categorize. So for instance, are some of the group norms or ways that your group communicates explicit or implicit? And then which of those 4 categories that we've talked about does your group norm fit in? So for instance, maybe you wrote down one of the ways that your group communicates is by regularly bringing in food. That's an implicit norm, right? And it might be something like an interaction norm, how your group members communicate. So again, I'm asking you to find a partner or group of 3. I'm asking you to work with that person on each other's norms that you wrote down, whether they're explicit or implicit, in which ways that you categorize. So take some time, find somebody maybe sitting near you to work with, and talk through how you might categorize the ways that your group members communicate. Yeah, so you, as you're working through that, write that down and kind of categorize or work through your thoughts for today.
Yeah, so,
Maybe like shaking or
I don't know. Yeah.
maybe like shaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess
Yeah.
well, it's just one of those. This is what it's supposed to be. Yeah, I think it's just.
Yeah.
Some classes. These like one of them, is it Monday? And the other one is like so it's classes and memorization.
many folks like some more time on this? Okay. Just a couple more minutes. I'm going to ask each person to share with a group in a couple of the norms that they have. So if you've already finished, you might think about how you might share or discuss some of the norms that came up for you. Like folks are just about in here. So what I'm going to have us do is go around, and when we get to you, what I'd like you to do is again remind us your name as we're still getting to know each other, and then pick a couple norms that you wrote down and how you would categorize those norms. So for instance, explicit, implicit, interaction, and so on. So for instance, right, my name is Ben. One organization or group that I was part of was Speech and Debate. One norm that we oftentimes had was that the person who was riding shotgun when we were driving to tournaments would be the DJ and would play music that was interesting for them and helped us to get to know each other better, which would be an implicit norm and oftentimes a more interaction-oriented norm. So let's start here with Dan.
So I said the app we use called Band. That's our way of like communicating most of the time. That's an explicit norm.
Yeah.
And shaking your opponent's hand before a match, that is a procedure-oriented norm.
Yeah. Good examples there. Go for it.
We were in the same group. We were also on the wrestling team, but my name is Kai. And we just discussed that we used band as our, as a way of communicating. And just like you said before that, we use shaking hands, the opponent's hand, and stuff like that. We kind of collaborated that together since we were in the same group. And stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. So something like a handshake, right, can be a pretty important norm to indicate some level of respect or support, even if you're not on the same kind of team or working together. Like the same time. Yeah. Okay.
We don't have our groups, but one thing I can say is like me and my best friend in the last college, like we always hanging out together, like, training together, like studying together or something. So basically we don't have any group rules or like group name, but kind of like there's actual norms.
Yeah. So a lot of times, right, cohabitating, living together with somebody, whether it's like the dorms, apartment, house, whatever, right, is an opportunity for you to develop some shared opportunity, shared understanding. So for instance, one implicit norm might be that the chores for that group are written down on a sticky note on the fridge, Or maybe a group norm is that every week you alternate who takes out the trash. So there's a lot of ways that norms can play into, living spaces as well.
My name is Justin. I chose my high school friend group, and for communication, we just text each other if we want to hang out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then, like if we want to go like downtown or do something fun, we always make sure we have like
Mhm.
so that's just procedure.
Yeah, right. So a lot of the ways that your group members agree to communicate with each other, such as through text, play a pretty big role. Yeah, go in the back.
So my name's Millie. The group I chose is my work crew. I work at Island City Market. I just one of the procedure oriented norms I chose was the tasks because we have a little whiteboard that we just write things that need to be accomplished in that day.
Mhm.
And everybody just kind of works on.
Yeah, so again, having like a shared space for communication, like a whiteboard or a sticky note, can be a really important way to group members work together.
All right, I'm Elena. One of the groups the group I used was one I was a part of when I was in high school. So some of the explicit norms are that we had to have a meeting every month, and I had to email them all once a day, and we were all elected into the group. Some of the implicit would be that we weren't super formal all the time, except for when a higher up in the organization was there.
Sure.
And another one is that we would always have to have each other's backs and always support each other.
Yeah.
And we use text and Snapchat to communicate mostly.
Interesting. Yeah. Especially right using Snapchat. So a lot of the way that like formality or informality plays into a group can be a pretty big part, right? Is there small talk and casual conversation, or is this a group where you're all business all the time? That can really impact the group norms too. Go ahead.
I did our night dividends committee, and status norm I said was sometimes we'll have the committee heads meet, and then a different meeting we'll have people that are helping the committee heads all meet up too.
Yeah.
Got achievement norm, because we hope to achieve put on a good dinner. Implicit norm, sometimes when we meet, someone will make dinner for the group.
Yeah. Again, good example of like a concrete achievement norm, right? Taking care of the other half.
I was part of the FFA officer team in high school. I would say it was mostly procedure oriented due to the fact that we all had our positions and roles that we were supposed to play. An implicit norm that we had was someone went to Dutch Bros during lunch to get everyone a drink, and then we ate lunch in the afternoon all together, and that would be an interaction.
Yeah, great example. Some of the ways that you have this agreement on things like getting Dutch Bros or food or drinks or whatever.
So the group that I did was like a signature for one group chat. An example of it would be incessant would be very much.
Yeah. Again, self-disclosure, sharing interests is something that might be open depending on how those group norms work. Yeah. Okay.
Me, I just feel like it's kind of like my group of friends that I play Xbox with.
Yeah.
I'm like back home, well, I'm calling my different like places now, so like one way we interact is just playing video games with each other, and we communicate. We like FaceTime, or playing Xbox, we do headset.
Yeah.
Kind of let's say like social norms. Something to talk about inside of like group chat, headset, whatever's states there outside. I'd say
Yeah.
it's crazy sometimes. Complicated.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the like games and stuff that we play will develop a lot of norms and rules around. So when I was in high school, I used to play Super Smash Bros. With my friends every day at lunch. And our rule was the person that got knocked out first, the person that got fourth place, had to give up their controller to somebody else so they rotate it to play the game, right? So there's a lot of ways that we develop these kinds of norms, rules, and so on over time. I was in that space, by the way. All right, let's go up here to the front.
So understand the roles, like dishes, picking up after ourselves, food, stuff like that. You don't really need to communicate it, but y'all just understand. And then I said interaction norms, so we established how we communicate with each other when faced with conflict.
Yeah. So creating that shared understanding, definitely be more implicit.
I chose the volleyball team and we communicate through text a lot, so that's explicit. And then for the interaction norm, I said giving each other high fives after we do something good.
Yeah, right. I definitely fit.
So I said our small group of baseball players that we separate off of for not the whole team. We communicate through Snapchat, so it's explicit. And I'd say our interaction norms is we show each other love by insulting and roasting each other.
Nice.
So I would say that would probably be,
Awesome.
I chose Sleep in Parallel, and we communicate using group text, which is explicit. I think most of our stuff in achievement norms is what we're working towards forming.
Yeah.
And our interaction norm, but that we usually speak to each other about, like our hip-hop solos or something like that.
Yeah, right. So there might be a shared achievement, but the way that you get there or the thing that a group member does as part of that wind up being really different, right? And strategy. Yeah. You know?
So I went with my high school basketball team. One of our explicit norms is we signed a little thing at the end of the year about how our team would go, how we would have to look for us. And then one of our staff was like the captain of that one day.
Yeah. Again, some examples of seeing that in action, both the rules and roles of some of those big up.
I chose my gymnastics team, but I was part of the 13 years. So some of the explicit rules are like part of the GP handbook, where there's a specific amount of skills that you need in order to achieve and a level of skills in order to compete. And then an interaction norm was that we went in every day and talked to each other about like our school days.
Yeah. So that casual conversation along with the formal.
I chose my work crew that I used to work at. It was a local coffee shop and it had a drive-through, so we're the explicit rules were really fast. And then I said that fell under like the achievement.
Yeah, it's interesting to see like a lot of these norms being about like how we communicate for text, how we use food, how we get something done, right? So really appreciate you all sharing and incorporating these examples. To wrap up, we talked about how norms and beliefs impact our group, group participation, and then some of the ways that we're categorizing these groups as well. Go ahead and pass forward, make sure that your name is on it. Your activity for today, you can also email that to me if you work on that remotely or through your laptop. Next class, we'll be talking more about how group norms are developed and shaped by things like status and trust. So go ahead and pass forward for today. Have a great morning and enjoy the week. And I look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday.